All right. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Deepak Singh. I'm a program manager in the Outlook ecosystem team. Uh, last session we last session we got to hear a lot about Graph and how to build your application using Graph and the APIs and the API landscape. In this talk, we'll be narrowing it. There will be few overlap content because I'll be explaining about using the graph, but with respect to the Outlook part of it, the mail, calendar, contact APIs. And the new thing that I'll be explaining about is the hybrid piece of it. How do you use graph to access the hybrid environment which you would have set up for your users? So agenda for today, I'm going to talk about the REST APIs, why you should use it, why you should invest your time in using it, why you should invest your time in building using our Outlook REST APIs or our Graph REST APIs. What are the benefits of it? Then I'm going to talk about a little bit about the Microsoft Graph accessing the on-prem users or the hybrid users. What's the architecture behind it? How does it do that? And those kind of stuff. And then I'll also be speaking about what are the new upcoming features, where are we investing in, and moving ahead. So key takeaways that I want you guys to have from this session is our REST APIs are simple, secure, easier to use, and are available everywhere. I'm going to go in detail in each point of them. Why do we say that? Before we delve into the APIs, let me give you a little bit overview of our Outlook or our Office Extensibility Platform. So Office Extensibility Platform composes of three points. I think you might have seen this slide before. The first point or the first extensibility point which we have is where you can build your application within the Office products. So for example, you can build an add-in, you can build your you can bring your solution into the Office space so that it's visible in the Office, it's visible inline the Office product. So it's going to be shown in the ribbon bar of Word, Outlook, and all those kind of stuff. So that's the number one extensibility endpoint. Number two is where you can take the Office 365 content using our REST APIs and build your own solutions. So this is the topic, or this is the extensibility endpoint that I'll be talking more about. And this is where graphs comes into picture. Using graph, you can access the content of the different Office 365 workloads of each of the users within Office 365 or within Microsoft. This is where we'll be delving more into. And the third extensibility endpoint is our new modern infrastructure where you have stuff like actionable messages, you have stuff like connectors, bots. I'm sure there are going to be different sessions explaining this. We'll be talking more about the second session or the second extensibility endpoints, that is using the Office 365 content to light up your solution. Why does REST API matter? Why would we invest our time building our application using these REST APIs? Number one, using the Microsoft REST APIs or the Outlook REST APIs or the Graph APIs, you will be able to access hundreds of millions of users. You will not only be able to access the Office 365 users, but you will also be able to access the Outlook.com consumer users. So a single API provides you reach to a large number of audience. Now we have said, now apart from this, we have also increased the reach of these APIs to our on-prem environments as well. As we know, like Exchange was brought up in the on-prem world, and a lot of our customers are still in that on-prem environment where they have set up their own Exchange servers, running their own mail servers. And we want these Graph APIs, or we want these APIs to reach to these on-prem users as well, so that your solution can be accessible to these on-prem users. The users that we have, the Office 365 users that we have, they are highly engaged users. They pay for this service, so they're continuously engaged on it. On an average, I think when we did a study, on an average, a user spends roughly 2 hours engaging with their email per day. So they are highly engaged users, a lot of content available there to build your scenarios around. Similarly, the consumer users are very active users as well, which use their consumer account for their email. The Outlook REST APIs are super powerful. They're very intuitive. It is easy to understand. A lot of folks are familiar with the REST technology, so you can build your scenarios, or you can light up your scenarios in a very fast manner. Outlook or REST APIs use OAuth 2.0, so you can have granular consent. That's the beauty of it. Like you can scope your application to the consent or to the APIs that you need. You don't need, if you don't need certain APIs, you don't ask for those permissions, and your application won't get permission. Your application won't get access to those APIs. So the end user feels much more secure because you're using the OAuth security mechanism. Our APIs are based on open standard, OAuth 2.0, JSON, OData. So I think we have out in the industry, folks are very familiar with these kind of technologies, and it's very easy to find resources for folks who can build using leverage. You can build their applications using these technologies. So how many of you guys are familiar with our old APIs, that is the Exchange Web Service or the EWS APIs? Not many, okay. So the REST APIs were, so earlier we had our Exchange Web Services API, those were the SOAP APIs, and we are moving away from them. Now we are the investment we are doing is towards our REST APIs, or that's why, and we want to expose this REST API through a single surface. That's the Microsoft Graph APIs on the top. So today our modern APIs that we call them as, we have the Microsoft Graph APIs and the Outlook REST APIs. So there are two layers at present. All the Outlook related features first gets exposed on the Outlook endpoint, and once they are baked in there, they get promoted to the Graph endpoint. And so Graph is a single layer where all the APIs are exposed for us. So these are the two endpoints which we are recommending our users or which are application developers to use or start to play with and build their application around. Previously, we had the old SOAP APIs, which worked both for which worked super awesome in the both on-prem world as well as the online world, but we are moving away from that. And before that, we had the Active Sync API as well, but we are not doing any more active investment in these two space. Majority of our investment are going to be done in the modern API space. I'm not going to go very deep into this, but I think we have already had a session about Microsoft Graph, so I'll skip quickly through these slides. I want to speak more about the hybrid part of this. So why Microsoft Graph? Why would you use that? So first, accessing data. Using Microsoft Graph, you will be able to access not only mail, calendar, contact, mail calendar contact. You will also be able to access the files of the user or the information about the user. So using a single API, you will be able to access all the user's content, as well as you will be able to traverse through the graph to make very interesting scenarios. For example, you can figure out a user, what are the files that he's accessing, what other users are accessing these kind of files. So these kind of insights you'll be able to develop by traversing through the graph. We also expose certain insights from our end, but you are free to build your own insights using the Microsoft Graph. Stuff like what are the trending files within your organization. Those are the kind of information that we are exposing through the Microsoft Graph. Another benefit of using Microsoft Graph is, I think that's I've explained before, that you will not only be able to access your Office 365 account, you will also be able to access your Outlook.com, Hotmail, and live mail accounts as well. So everything is in one single place. So graph.microsoft.com is the endpoint for it. Again, in the previous state, we were in a world where you had each workload was divided into the two streams, the Office 365 and the personal one, and people had to figure out the right auth endpoint to connect to it. People had to figure out what endpoint do they need to connect to, and then that was a little bit of problem for these users or these application developers. But now using Graph, you wouldn't have this problem because you connect to a single endpoint, that is graph.microsoft.com, and you will get access to all the content which is present there. Whether it is personal or work or school, it doesn't matter, across the workloads as well. So Graph today exposes our Outlook content, that is mail, calendar, contacts. Graph now also exposes our Outlook task APIs or the task content as well. These are the few ways to get the APIs, or these are the few ways to get the content from Graph or the Outlook content from Graph. All right, so what are the APIs that we have enabled, or what are the Outlook entities that we have enabled on Graph? Number one is the mail related content. So you will be able to access mail folder, messages. You'll be able to access the event messages that you get in your inbox for the event requests and all those stuff. Then you'll be able to access the item and the attachments that are associated with those mails. All the calendar entities that you see in your Outlook. You will be able to access the calendar groups, the calendars. You'll be able to access the event, the reminder views, and all those kind of stuff. Similarly, contacts. You'll be able to access the contact folders, groups. We have lit up group conversation, thread, post, group calendar, group events. So you can build your scenarios around groups as well. Profile. If you want users' picture, you can get high definition, high quality pictures from the mailbox or from a low quality picture from AAD. Mailbox settings, this is important. A lot of folks have been asking us to expose users' mailbox setting. For example, if I set my automatic replies, or if I set my OOF settings, how do I get that information? So today, using the mailbox setting entities, you will be able to get the automatic replies of the users, what language is that user using, which time zone is the user in, all the stuff that the user sets while setting up his Outlook profile. So those information has been exposed through Graph as of today. Data extensibility. We have both extension and extended properties. I want to delve a little bit into this. So there are a lot of applications which want to stamp custom property, their own property onto the each item, so that they can build their scenarios using them, using those extended properties. For example, if I get an email and I want to mark this email as a lead email, I can stamp my own custom property using extension or extended properties onto that item, and then later on filter or retrieve the items based on those properties, that the custom properties that I have stamped. So I can get a collection of all the leads that has been present, that I've received in my email or through my contacts. So these are super useful for our application developers. We highly recommend to use extension instead of extended properties, because extended property is an old concept where there's a finite set of extended properties that you can stamp, but extension is a blob where you can stamp as many key value pair as you want. So capabilities, I think we have all the CRUD capabilities. You can create, read, update, delete, and we also have other capabilities like webhook, sync. All the stuff are enabled both on the Outlook endpoint as well as on the Graph endpoint. Graph has a beta endpoint as well, where we first light up our features. So once you go from an Outlook endpoint into the Graph beta endpoint, stuff gets baked over there. These endpoint has the latest and the greatest features through Graph. We ask developers to play with them or give us feedback, but we ask developers not to take a production dependency on these beta endpoints. These will have the latest and the greatest change, but we reserve the right to do any breaking changes in this endpoint. On our production endpoint, we will never do any breaking changes. So the entities that are exposed, or the features that are exposed on the Graph beta endpoint are @mentions. @mentions is the new feature that we are lighting up, where when you type an email, and if you type @user blah, then that information will also be exposed through Graph. That, hey, this user has been tagged in this email. Event message request. If you get a message which has, if you get like an invite, calendar invite, that's an event message for us. Application developers wanted a way to differentiate between a regular message and an event message so that they can take custom actions. We are now exposing those information in the beta endpoint as well, so that the user can differentiate between them. Reference attachment. Today you can add an attachment as an item attachment or a file attachment. Now this is a third format of attachment where the file is hosted in cloud and the item is attached as a reference in the email that you sent out, so that there's a lot of collaboration and all those, so that all the folks are accessing a single file which is present either in your OneDrive or on your SharePoint. So those kind of file attachment or those kind of attachments would also be exposed on our mail properties. In calendar, we have something called Find Meeting Time API. Finding meeting times is you put in 2 users, and this API would then tell you what is the earliest slot that is available for both of these users, or what is the earliest free slot that is available for both of these users. It's more like the schedule feature with the schedule view which you see in the Outlook when you're trying to schedule a meeting. Forward event APIs. Earlier there was no way to forward an event in our APIs. We have added that. There are a lot of requests for these as well. People, we have added. So in people we are adding the read mode of the people as well. You can just read the properties. Earlier we added only permissions using which you could access and edit. But now folks said that, hey, no, we want permissions to only read the people information. We provided that. Profile pictures. Today you will be able to retrieve profile pictures in multiple sizes as well. Based on your device screen size, you can then use one of these profile pictures as per your requirement. Mail tips. In Outlook, when you're sending an email or when you're setting up a meeting, you see the yellow line on the top which says that, hey, this user is away. So you can, and then you see his oof message, so that then you can add some other person onto that email or all those kind of stuff. So that information will also be exposed through our mail tips. Other capabilities we are exposing would be like Delta Sync, which is going to be, other capabilities are like Delta Sync that's going to be exposed as well. As I said, there is the Outlook endpoint and there is a Graph endpoint. The new features that get exposed first on the Outlook endpoint and then they go to the Graph endpoint. So what are the features that are exposed on our Outlook production endpoint? Outlook production endpoint is the v2.0, where we have exposed Outlook task. I think now we are planning to move this to, or we have moved this to Graph as well. I just have to double check on that. Capabilities, stuff that has been exposed on the v2.0, sync folder hierarchy. Like you can download the entire folder hierarchy as well, and you can use the sync feature for it. Delta Sync. On the beta endpoint, you have the streaming notification, batching APIs when signed in as a user. So these are the few capabilities that we're exposing on the beta endpoint or our Outlook endpoints. It will soon get promoted to the Graph endpoint as well. What is next? What are the new things that are coming in? On Microsoft Graph, from Outlook perspective, we are moving our mailbox settings API from beta to v1.0, or we are moving it from our beta endpoint to the production endpoint. Extended properties and Outlook task APIs, they are also being moved from beta to production endpoint. So soon you can start using them in the production applications as well. On the Outlook side, message Delta Sync APIs or message folder hierarchy sync is also being moved from our beta to our production endpoint. New APIs, as I said, what are added are the mail tips, @mentions, forward event APIs. These are the stuff that is going to be added into the Graph beta endpoint. For Outlook REST APIs, streaming notification is the API that's going to be added as well. Delegate and shared mailbox access. Supposedly, I give my access to my assistant and he or she wants to access both the content of his or her mailbox as well as my mailbox. So that's the delegate permissions or delegate scenarios which we want to light up using our Outlook endpoint as well as the Graph endpoint. So today, that functionality is not present, but we are setting up this infrastructure to enable those kind of scenarios as well, and people can then build their applications around the delegate scenarios. Okay, so this is where I want to spend more time on. Today, Microsoft Graph, using Microsoft Graph, you could only access our Office 365 users or Microsoft users. In short, the users that are present in cloud. That's what Graph did. It just contacted a single endpoint, that is outlook.office365.com. When the request was for messages, Graph would contact outlook.office365.com. That is our Outlook Exchange endpoint. And you would only be able to access the users that are in data center. However, a lot of our big customers are in this mode where they say, hey, I have set up my environment intentionally so that I set up my environment and have intentionally kept my mailboxes in the on-prem world. And Graph, if I build my application using Graph, I won't be able to leverage that same application for these on-prem users. So we had to light up this feature where Graph could proxy Graph would proxy the request not only to our Outlook endpoint or our data center endpoint, it should also be able to proxy the request to the on-prem endpoint. So there was a lot of infrastructure that had to be built to light up this feature. So let's quickly go through them and see how it is. In the earlier world, what you had to do, you had to first, given a user email address, you had to first sign in the user using his credential. Then you had to discover where the user's mailbox is, where this email address mailbox is. You would use an algorithm called auto discover using the credentials as well as the email address. It's a very complicated client-side logic where it would then figure out where the user's mailbox is. Then we would auto discover will tell you, hey, your mailbox is in data center, therefore your URL is outlook.office365.com, or it will tell you, hey, your mailbox is in on-prem, therefore your URL is mail.contoso.com. So go to that particular endpoint. Once you're done with this complicated logic of figuring out where the user's mailbox is and what's the endpoint to connect to it, you would then connect to that endpoint and ask for the content. And the protocol that you could use was EWS, or you would use REST. But you see, there's a lot of client-side logic or complicated client-side logic which had to be built to enable these scenarios. Now, how do we simplify this? In order to simplify this, we had to come up with a mechanism. We had to ask Graph to do all this heavy load, so that as a user or as an application developer, I will only contact graph.microsoft.com. And graph.microsoft.com will do all this heavy load of figuring out where the user's mailbox is, and then proxy that request, gather the information back from it, aggregate it, and then send it back to the application. So this is what, in the new world, this is what it's going to be. Like, you provide in the email address, you are going to authenticate against graph.microsoft.com. So in your token which you get back, you will see the audience is going to be graph.microsoft.com. Graph then launches an anonymous auto discover request behind the scene to figure out where the user's mailbox is. And so before that, since you are authenticated, you are going to consent to Graph. You are going to the experience is going to be exactly the same both for the online user as well as the on-prem user. He's going to see the screen where he authenticates, he consents to Graph application saying, yes, I consent, and then a token is issued, and then Graph has to do all the background load of figuring out where the mailbox is, proxying that request to the correct endpoint, and all those kind of stuff. So now, the beauty of this is Graph does not, so now as an application developer, I don't need to remember any of this different endpoints infrastructure. To me, I just connect to Graph. Graph does all the heavy load of figuring out the right endpoint, the right authentication mechanism. The authentication is still going to be the same, where it's a granular consent model, even for these on-prem users. So using the same application, you will be able to light up, or you will be able to reach multiple customers. Architecture. This is where I want to spend more time on. Like, how does it work? Let's go scenario by scenario. For example, I'm going to take the cloud user first. In the earlier, what's going to happen is you go to graph.microsoft.com. Graph.microsoft.com is then going to send you to Azure Active Directory, where you would then authenticate again using your own credentials. So the application doesn't see credits in any format. AAD would give you a token back. Once you have the token back, Graph in the previous world will blindly proxy that request. If it was a messages request, it will blindly proxy that request to outlook.office.com or outlook.office365.com. That is our production endpoint. And if the mailbox is present in that environment, you will get a response back. And then Graph would aggregate that request and proxy it back to the cloud users or to the application. This was a previous world. In the new world, where a user can be on-prem user as well, the experience for the application is going to be very similar. Let's see how it happens. On-premise user, he comes to graph.microsoft.com. Graph again gives the same experience of authenticating the user against AAD. So the information about this on-prem user needs to be present in Azure Active Directory. He authenticates against it. Graph then issues an auto discover request to figure out where the user's mailbox is. And that anonymous auto discover request, that's going to be autodiscover.contoso.com or whatever the auto discover process is over here. It goes to the on-prem endpoint. The on-prem auto discover tells you, hey, your REST mail endpoint is going to be mail.contoso.com. That's what it tells Graph. Now, so the Graph now knows where to proxy this request to or where to send this request to. So Graph then goes back to AAD, tells, hey, I need to send this request to mail.contoso.com. However, the token which I have received is for graph.microsoft.com. So it goes back to AD, tells him, hey, give me a new token for mail.contoso.com. Once the user has this token, once the Graph has this new token for the on-prem endpoint, it proxies that request to on-prem endpoint, gets a response back, aggregates it, and then sends it back to the application. So the step number 1 and 8 is exactly the same as what the cloud user received over here. There's no difference between the behavior for the cloud user or the on-prem user. So now a single endpoint, you will be able to access the on-prem users as well. So on Graph, so the capability, so we know that on-prem users or on-prem environment do not rev up as quickly or as fast as our data center environments. Therefore, we have lit up a subset of features that is present in our cloud environment. But I think those are the features which majority of our application developers use. So for on-prem users, you can today access mail folders, messages, item, file attachments, calendar. You can access calendar group, calendars, event, calendar view, all this kind of stuff that we have. Even the profile picture, mailbox settings, data extensibility. You can only in data extensibility you only have extended properties for the on-prem users. And capabilities, again, you have all the CRUD functionalities for these on-prem users as well. These features which is present on-prem is a subset of what the features that are going to be present online. But that's for a reason that, hey, on-prem guys don't rev up as fast as the cloud folks.
What's the performance difference?
The performance is a little bit slower for the on-prem user. It's definitely dependent on where the servers are hosted, what type of the on-prem servers are hosted. The data center servers, there's a lot of infrastructure built around it for performance, but it depends on what type of environment or what type of setup the on-prem guys have done. So definitely there's a little bit of lag, but we are trying to build a lot of caching around in our service so that the application doesn't notice those kind of latencies around. But yes, there is going to be, the performance is comparatively a little bit lower as compared to the cloud environment. So what is needed to, and so now this doesn't come free. Of course, the on-prem guys have, in order to enable or in order to leverage this feature, they have to do certain setups. So what are the setups that is needed to enable the on-prem mailboxes to be accessed via Graph? The on-prem bits need to be on the latest, or at least it needs to be on Exchange 2016 CU3 and above. The reason I say this is because we have launched REST APIs, which is in preview on this particular build. So we have launched two things. Number one, we have launched our REST APIs to this on-prem build. Number two, remember the discovery service which I mentioned before, the anonymous discovery service. That service has also been put up in this particular build, Exchange 2016 CU3. So if you want to leverage Graph for your mailbox, on-prem mailboxes, the on-prem mailboxes need to be on Exchange 2016 CU3 and above. Once you run your setup, once you upgrade to this newer build, we generally ask our IT admins, or we generally ask the admins to run this step called prepare AD explicitly. This basically registers Graph as a trusted partner in the on-prem environments. And generally the IT admin on-prem IT admins do run this by default, but here I'm just mentioning explicitly that, hey, if you don't do it, please do it, so that Graph is registered as a trusted partner application, and only then a token issued from Graph can be proxied or can be accepted by these on-prem mailboxes. So this is more for security concerns and all this stuff. The benefit of this is, since it's in the control of the on-prem IT admin, since we add Graph as a trusted partner application. If the IT admin feels that, hey, I do not want any requests coming from Graph to go to this on-prem users, or I do not want any request to for Graph to be used for this on-prem users, he can remove Graph as one of the trusted partner application, and Graph would then stop working for these on-prem users. The third important thing is like the experience that we are giving to our developers is you authenticate against AAD. We want that same experience to be present both for the cloud user as well as the on-prem user. And therefore, it is necessary these on-prem users' AD information need to be fully desynced or synced with the Azure Active Directory. So since you're in hybrid mode, we want you to fully sync your on-prem AD, or at least the required properties of this on-prem AD to this cloud Azure Active Directory, so that we can then authenticate you using our Azure Active Directory page. So single auth endpoint. Those are 3 steps that are required. Additional, I think, network infrastructure requirements are you need to set up your DNS. There are DNS requirements which is present even today. In the if you're setting a hybrid environment, you're supposed to set up your DNS correctly. That's going to be your auto discover DNS or your on-prem REST API DNS and all those kind of stuff. So I think there's nothing new over here. It's just I'm mentioning it explicitly. The second point is important. Firewall setting application. If you have set up your environment to allow only or if you have set up your load balancer or network layer to allow only certain APIs or certain paths, you need to open up the new virtual directory, that is /API, which is for our REST request, and /autodiscover.json virtual directory, which is for our anonymous autodiscover v2 request. So those, if you have blocked it explicitly, then you would have to open up these 2 endpoints so that the Graph can then proxy the request to these on-prem users and get their mailbox information. Yes, and the third point is very important. Like, since our REST bits and our autodiscover bits are in Exchange 2016 CU3 and above, therefore, if you have a cafe layer above, if you have divided your role in such a way that you have your front end is balanced by cafe and your back end is balanced, or your mailboxes are on certain servers, your cafe layer needs to be on E16 CU3 and above. The reason I say that is a request can come and fall on any of the cafe servers. Therefore, the cafe server layer needs to be on the latest bit so that it can understand that, hey, this is a REST request and this is where I need to proxy it to, or this is an autodiscover v2 request and this is how I need to proxy it to. So that's a requirement, that the cafe layer, all the servers in the cafe layer need to be on E16 CU3 and above. So those are the requirements if you want to enable your on-prem mailboxes to be accessed by a Graph, which generally it works around as well. What's new? Now we are trying to light up the scenarios around the management. We want your feedback. We want you to use this feature. It's in preview version. We want you to use this thing. Give us feedback. How hard is it for you to set up and maintain these kind of environment? Can we do anything? Although we are doing a lot of automatic stuff, we are like in a hybrid config wizard. A lot of this configuration or the setup which I was talking about in the previous 2 slides has been automated. Like if you run hybrid config wizard today, which is generally recommended for our on-prem hybrid setup IT admins. If you run hybrid config wizard, it does a lot of setup behind the scene, so you don't have to worry explicitly about anything. But again, we would like to get more feedback. That, hey, what challenges are you facing? Please let us know so that we can think about what are the new solutions that we can come up to ease the life both of the developer as well as the on-prem IT admin. Ideally, all the features that you have set up for your on-prem environment, the ADFS, the auth mechanisms, what the on-prem IT admin has done, that should be supported in using this environment, using this feature as well. However, if that does not work for you, or if for some reason you have a weird topology and this feature is not working for you, we would like to hear those kind of feedback so that we can then incorporate those features into our solution. Again, we would also like to hear about the perf latencies, what you're talking about. Hey, what can we do to improve our stuff. So we need your help to make this work, great work, make this work for you, or make it work more seamlessly for you guys. So right now this feature, the graph accessing the hybrid users is in preview mode. We want to exit the preview mode as soon as possible. Again, we are baking this feature. We are waiting to get a lot of feedback so that we can then incorporate those feedback. And we are doing a lot of work around these things. These are the few criteria that we have put up to exit the preview features or to exit the preview mode. Like as I said, we are incorporating a lot of automation in the hybrid config wizard update. So if you run those hybrid config wizard, the newest build of the hybrid config wizard, a lot of stuff gets automatically populated, or a lot of configuration gets automatically set up for you. Similarly, we want to light up, like for each of this, irrespective of the mailbox being in cloud or in the on-prem, a user or an application developer should be able to query what are the capabilities for these mailboxes, so that he can build his applications around that. So we are trying to light up those features. We are trying to add more and more of those cloud APIs that we have lit up to be lit up for these on-prem users as well, so that when you build your scenarios, it can work for both this on-prem as well as the cloud users. So again, so we are trying to add notification support. We are trying to add extensions for these on-prem users and other APIs as well. Today, if you want, you can. Again, we would love to hear your feedback. Again, today, if you want, or you want to play with, or you want to see like how this Graph Explorer or the graph is able to access the on-prem users, you can go to Graph Explorer, and I think I'll show you guys in the end. You can go to Graph Explorer, use an on-prem account, and see if that you're able to get messages or calendar contact for these users. So beyond hybrid, so today Exchange was the first workload to enable this feature, where you could access both on-prem and the cloud. But there are a lot of other workloads as well, like SharePoint is the next workload that we're thinking about. How do we enable the access of this on-prem SharePoint sites or on-prem SharePoint workload as well? So Graph should not only be able to access the on-prem Exchange mailboxes, but also the on-prem SharePoint information about the user. So we're trying to extend the support. The next thing that the next area that we are thinking about is, yes, it's awesome that we are now able to target these on-prem hybrid environments, but there are a lot of environments where there is no connectivity with cloud at all. Like users, like big users have bought Exchange. In the Exchange, they have set up their own environment with no configuration with cloud, with no touch with the cloud or our data center. How do we enable Graph for these type of on-prem environments as well? What's going to be the auth scenario? Since in the previous one, the AD information is synced, you can authenticate the user. How would authentication look like for these kind of users? So that's the area where we are trying to invest, or where we are trying to investigate at this point of time. There's no timeline for this associated, which I can give to you guys. Just telling you that, hey, we are looking into this as of now. For this on-prem setup, these are nice documents that are present online, and people should definitely leverage them and see how they can use for setting up their environment. These are the few resources that are available. Before wrap up, I think I need to show you guys a quick demo of Graph Explorer. I think you guys would have definitely seen this in the previous session. So this is the Graph Explorer that we see. I want to sign in through. I want to show you guys the experience. How does it look like for an on-prem user? Like, experience is the same. I sign in with. I'm going to say, hey, sign in with Microsoft. It's going to ask me which user do I need to sign into. I'm going to say use another. This is my on-prem. This is my on-prem mailbox, like better.email.com. trust me on this one. It's an on-prem mailbox. I'm not good. I don't know how to prove this. I can log into OA and show you guys how it's going to do, but for now, trust me. So the moment I do this, I go to next. What you can see, the thing that I want to show is like this for this on-prem environment, I have set up an ADFS. I set up an ADFS topology where the authentication goes to the on-prem ADFS page, where the on-prem ADFS page or the on-prem auth server is used to authenticate that particular user. So these kind of complex topology will also be handled by this graph. So now I go to the on-prem auth server, I enter my password. No, I don't want to say my password. What's happening behind the scene is the on-prem auth server. So as the on-prem auth server gives a token back to Graph. At this point of time, we are not authenticating against Azure Active Directory. We are authenticating against the on-prem auth server, which then gives a token back to Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory modifies that token, gives it to Graph, and says, hey, you know what? Hey, Graph, there you go. You have a new token. You can use this token to access these on-prem mailboxes as well. So, and at the right endpoint using the correct endpoint. As you can see, now I've logged in using the on-prem mailbox or the on-prem user. Now I can issue request. First request might, oh no, it was pretty fast. Using /me, me aggregates a lot of information from the cloud Azure Active Directory as well as the on-prem Active Directory. So Graph does those kind of aggregation for you. But messages, since this user's mailbox is on-prem, this request is now doing an auto discover, figuring out where the user's mailbox is, goes to that on-prem, gets all that mail information, sends it back to Graph, aggregates it, and then sends it back. The first request might be a little bit slow because it has to do it doesn't do auto discovery process in each and every single request. It does auto discovery process once. Graph does auto discovery process once, then caches that endpoint information so that the following requests become much faster. But as you can see, now I can get the messages for these on-prem mailboxes as well. That is awesome, cool, it works. All right, wrap up. The key takeaway that I mentioned, hey, these are super powerful APIs. Using this API, so using the Graph APIs, you will be able to access all the contents, the mail, calendar, contact, SharePoint, OneDrive, all the stuff. So it is super powerful. You can build a lot of scenarios. It is secure. As you see that you can we use OAuth flow throughout the place, even for cloud as well as for the on-prem users. So same granular consent, same auth mechanism. The application never gets to see the user's cred. It's always AAD that stores or manages the user's identity. So it is super secure both for the application as well as for the on-prem users. Super easy to use. REST APIs that are super useful, or it is super intuitive. Like /files goes to files, /message goes to messages, and all those kind of stuff. This is where we are making our strategic investments in. So if you are using or if you're building your application using EWS or Exchange Web Services or EAS, we will not be adding any new features into those. We will be maintaining them, but we will not be adding any new features into those protocols. This is where we are adding or making a strategic investment in. We are adding new features in REST APIs moving forward, and as well as if there are any gaps between EWS and REST APIs, we are trying to close that gap as quickly as possible. So yeah, our endpoints are production ready. Please use them, leverage them into your applications, and give us feedback. There are a lot of places where you can give us feedback, or we would love to hear from you as well. So you can post your questions either on Stack Overflow with specific tagged Microsoft Graph. The moment you post those questions come to us. We'll be happy to reply to them on Graph Overflow. Plus, there's a lot of community that has been built around these on Stack Overflow, which folks can answer each other's question as well. Similarly, there are a lot of API docs available. If you have any new feature request, or if you feel there's something missing, you can post those kind of stuff on the user voice. Yeah, for Outlook related stuff, again, Outlook REST. If you have specific any questions related to Outlook stuff, you can post it on Stack Overflow with this hashtag Outlook-REST API. Again, those questions come to us. We'll be happy to answer them. User voice for everything else. I think those are the resources which I would request you guys to leverage and let us know what to do. That's all I have for me. And questions? Cool.
Thank you.
All right.